Well, here we are again, another edition of the Newport This Week video podcast series. I'm Bill Bartholomew. Remember, you can find all of our episodes on the Newport This Week YouTube page and at newportthisweek.com. We bring you, you know, interesting stories from Newport and Newport County as a whole. And today we have a very important story, a really important conversation that is part of a much larger thread, a much larger vertical theme. Before we get going any further, though, we've got two people on with us today. And for anybody who is not in the know, Rebecca and John, if you want to each introduce yourself, we'll start with Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Bertrand. I'm the Executive Director of the Newport Historical Society.
Nice.
John Pantalone. I was at one time in the Dark Ages, the editor of Newport This Week, and I am now retired, what do you call it, Professor Emeritus of Journalism, which sounds like a really big deal, but I'm still just retired.
I love it. It's a fantastic title to hold, that's for sure. So today we're talking.
Why not?
Yeah, why not? Exactly. We're talking about something really important, as I alluded to in the open, and the headline in this week's edition of the paper: Resurrecting a Historic House and Long Neglected Black History. The Newport Historical Society has officially announced a $4.5 million capital campaign to restore Newport's oldest colonial home and convert it to a museum devoted to the region's Black history. At an unveiling of plans for the 1697 Wanton-Lyman-Hazard House, the Newport Historical Society Board President Douglas Newhouse hailed the conversion as a project to share the history of African Americans in Newport that has gone untold for the most part. Couldn't agree more with that statement, that there's a huge deficit in our history writ large, particularly in Newport. Rebecca, why is this important?
Oh, it's an incredibly important story to be told in Newport, and an incredibly important story to be told all around the country. And we've chosen the Wanton-Lyman-Hazard House, one of the oldest houses in Newport, as you just mentioned, to be the site for this center. It's going to be told there among the other properties that the Historical Society runs and maintains, because that house has a long history with African American history. The site is where we know the names of at least 4 of the enslaved individuals who lived and labored in that house. Briston, Jenny, Kaysen, and Cadardo were in that home. We, in 2005, nearly 20 years ago, under the floorboards of the attic and in Kesey, where an African spirit bundle was found under the floorboards. And that spirit bundle was so culturally significant that it was displayed in the African American History Museum, the Smithsonian, in Washington, D.C. when it first opened. And so relying upon that story and then building from it, we're working in an alliance for Black history with a few organizations in town to further develop this story, building out an interpretive plan and using 2 of the parlors in the house to develop a permanent exhibition gallery and a temporary exhibition gallery. There'll be a classroom space, a contemporary art sculpture garden in the yard, and then this will be a space for learning, exploration, conversation, and really a community gathering space that will be in this site. So I think it's a really important place where we'll have critical conversations about race and equity and moving forward as a community.
Yeah, and that's a conversation that is essential to have. It's become, for some reason, politicized, but in the end of the day, it really is just, a civilized society ought to have these conversations outside of any political context. John, as you were reporting this story, what were the big themes that jumped out to you? There's the obvious ones, but going sort of one step below the surface.
Well, a couple of things kind of hit me while folks were speaking, and one of them was that people have had this impression of African American history as separate, as a separate element from American history, and of course it isn't separate at all. It's part of it, and always has been. And I think a museum that gives context to that would be really helpful. The other thing that struck me was that this is happening at a time when a lot of people don't are resisting having the history taught to children in public schools. We've seen this all across the country, especially in particular states, Texas being one of them, Florida another. And it's become, in that respect, it's like a political football that keeps getting kicked around, when knowing the history is critical, and children should be taught something more than they were once enslaved people in the United States. In Newport, Newport's history in that regard is essential. So it's great that the Historical Society is doing this, and I would tell folks to make sure they get to the society to see the exhibition that's there now, because it hits you that it's about Newport, and it's about people who lived right nearby. So yeah, it's all important, and I think Rebecca's doing a great job with all of this.
I recall Keith Stokes on several occasions saying and reminding me in some of the journalism that I've done and many, many others that Black history is not slave history. And that's such an important theme. And you touched on that, John. And Rebecca, as you tell these stories and you preserve them for future generations, building off of that notion, and this weird, and I use that word, I think, appropriately, because I saw comments on another outlet's post about this very same topic where people would say, oh, who cares? Nobody cares. This is DEI. And you realize just how sick our society has become as a result of this poison that has been injected into it. Maybe it's always been there and it's just surfacing in a new way. But as you tell these stories, how important is it for you to get that message across that this is fundamentally, when you look at an American flag waving anywhere, just like you think of George Washington and the cherry tree, or the founding fathers in any context, whether it's serious or minor in terms of the consequences of the story, how do you integrate properly Black history into American history in a storytelling fashion?
Well, that's exactly why the plan for the building is to have this new center open in 2026. 2026 is the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And that's exactly why we're planning to open this space as part of our celebrations for the 250th of the country. This is exactly what American history is all about. It's about a real representation of what American history is, to tell a more representative story of what was happening in our country and what independence means, and what the founding fathers ultimately, what America means and what America looks like, and what we were founded on, a founding principle that there should be freedom. And I think that, as John was mentioning, I encourage people to come up and see our exhibition, which is on view at the Richard I. Burnham Resource Center on 82 Toro Street. Our exhibition now is called A Name, a Life, a Voice, the Black Newporters of the 17th to 19th centuries. And it's all about identity. And I think it doesn't matter what the color of your skin is, what we're talking about is about identity and individuals and what the meaning of your name is. And I think that there's something so fundamentally universally understood about that. And that's where, when we're talking about making an impact in people's lives and education, and that starts at a young age, and something that we can make an impact in people's lives early in life. And so that's why we're, planning for this new space to be one where we can make a real impact with children, and teaching history to people early in life, working hopefully with Thompson Middle School, because we're so close to Thompson Middle School at the Wanton-Lyman-Hazard House. We're just a stone's throw away. It's like 3 buildings away. So it's a perfect space to work with middle school students. And I think, there's so much work that can be done to be truly collaborative and make this be a hub, not just for scholarly research, but for research and education for all ages.
And that's exactly the point that I was hoping that we build towards, John. Journalism's role in telling these stories, certainly for an elementary school student or a scholar of sorts, they have a bit more of an orientation to dig in, or a requirement to dig in, depending on the scenario. But for the average everyday reader of works such as your own, how important is it for journalists to properly and with depth and courage, perhaps, tell these stories?
Well, I suspect there are journalists now who are feeling that there's a risk involved in advocating for that. But there are plenty of journalists who have done that for ages, I mean, going back to the 19th century. You met Keith Stokes, and he's done a lot to advocate for the learning and teaching and learning. And because I've been around reporting on some of this stuff for a long time, I remember local women in the 70s and 80s who were doing that, and made a little bit of progress, but not that much. I mentioned a couple in the story that I wrote. Eleanor Keyes was a significant advocate, and I learned a lot about the early 20th century of African Americans in Newport from her. And that is, as you said, Bill, that's, it's not just the history of slavery, it's the history of people after slavery and well through the 20th century. Yeah.
Super well said. I massively respect this project, as I know a lot of people do, even if there's some, again, weird comments on Facebook from a few people. I think by and large, the public wants this type of stuff. I wish we had 3 hours. We've got about 30 seconds. Where can people, how can people find out, hours and sort of, if they want to get involved, either as a supporter, as somebody who wants to share this with other people, attend the openings, things of this sort? What's the next step for people?
People can get involved in the project at voices.newporthistory.org.
Fantastic. John, Rebecca, thank you both so much for your time and your efforts here.
Thank
Sure.
you.
Thank you.